a slap in the face of our founding fathers.
President George Washington would likely be astonished since he warned against the insidious wiles of foreign influence.
Once the articles are finalized, the committee will likely send them to the House floor for consideration.
Fox's Steve Rappaport. There were fireworks earlier in the Senate Judiciary Committee hearing with Inspector General Michael Horowitz testifying about his report into the FBI's investigation of Russian election meddling, in which he says there were mistakes.
So many basic and fundamental errors were made by 3 separate hand-picked investigative teams.
Texas Senator Ted Cruz says the probe turned into something different.
They sent spies to record senior members of the campaign in the middle of a presidential campaign.
They send confidential human sources in to do those.
About the claim by fired FBI Director James Comey that the report clears the FBI of wrongdoing, Inspector General Horowitz said his report exonerates no one. In Tuesday's murder of a New Jersey police officer and then an attack on a Jewish market in Jersey City, investigators now know who, but not why.
Right now, we are working to learn more about the shooter's motivations and whether anyone besides the 2 gunmen may have been involved.
That's New Jersey's Attorney General Gerbir Grewald. The shooters have been identified as David Anderson and Francine Graham, a source telling the AP at least one of them was associated with the Black Hebrew Israelites, considered to be an anti-Semitic group. America is listening to Fox News.
Did you know that home loan rates have plunged again? Would you like to take advantage of these lower rates to help lower your monthly payments? Refinancing doesn't have to be for another 30 years. It can be for 10, 15, or 20 years. It's up to you. Reduce your monthly payments. Pay off your loan earlier. At Bank Pacific, where we're open to closing your loan in a hurry.
Bank Pacific, where others put branches, we place roots.
Equal housing lender. Credit conditions apply.
Hop a day. This is Melanie Mendiola.
And this is Ricky Hernandez. We're with the Guam Economic Development Authority.
And we're both alumni of the University of Guam. We're calling on our fellow alumni to make an investment in Guam's future by contributing to the G is for Giving campaign. With your donation, you are giving more students the opportunity to graduate, making Guam a better place.
To make a tax-deductible donation, log on to give.uog.edu before December 31st or call 735-2957 for more information.
Viva UOG!
Massive defense bill unveiled just this week could become law soon.
President Trump on Twitter signaling he will sign the bipartisan defense bill that authorizes a major spending boost to the Pentagon and endorses his proposed new Space Force. The president tweeting, "Wow, all of our priorities made it into the final bill. Pay raise for our troops, rebuilding our military, paid parental leave, border security, and Space Force." He continued, "Congress, don't delay this anymore. I will sign this historic defense legislation immediately." The House is expected to vote on the massive $738 billion National Defense Authorization Act this week. At the White House, John Decker, Fox News.
Next week, Congress will have to wrestle again with funding for the government. The latest stopgap spending bill set to run out next Thursday. Funding for a border wall could reemerge as a sticking point. Texas has carried out the last execution of 2019. Travis Runnels put to death for the murder of a prison guard in 2003. There were 22 executions in 2019, 9 of them in Texas. A decades-old cold case in Minnesota has apparently been solved.
65-year-old John Robert Capers is due in court Thursday. He's charged in the death of 39-year-old Annette Seymour, whose partially clothed body was found near a streetcar tunnel in 1992. In 2009, the State Bureau of Criminal Apprehension tested evidence found at the scene and found there was a DNA match to Capers, who is in a national database for investigators, but that database cannot be used in court. The match was confirmed in 2011, but there were further delays because, in part, the money used to pay for the cold case investigations ran out. The investigation picked up steam again last year. When Capers was interviewed by authorities in 2011, he denied knowing Seymour or having anything to do with her death. Lisa Lacera, Fox News.
And I'm Jack Callahan. This is Fox News.
A diamond ring turns into a black pearl and hangs shimmering in the sky.
Join 93.3 The Point for a spectacular celestial event. On the evening of December 26th, a rare solar eclipse will take place just before sunset.
We see the sun's atmosphere, normally not visible.
Most of the sun will be blocked during the eclipse, leaving only a ring of fire visible, and we have the best seats and the safest way to watch it.
It's one of the great wonders of the solar system.
Join us at the Point Coffee Lounge at the Sheraton Laguna Guam Resort from 4 to 6 p.m. on December 26th. The first 100 guests will receive a pair of Eclipse viewing glasses, a complimentary glass of iced tea, and a coupon good for discounts at Sheraton's Surfers Point Bar or La Cascada Buffet Restaurant. Join us for the Point's 2019 Eclipse Viewing Party, December 26th from 4 to 6 p.m. at the beautiful Sheraton Laguna Guam Resort. Brought to you in part by Sheraton Laguna Guam Resort, Mezcla Chamorro Fusion Bistro, and your Sky Watching friends at 93.3 The Point.
Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie is brought to you by Bank Pacific, banking on the Pacific for 65 years.
Welcome to Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie, the only show on talk radio where common sense is a lot more common. Phone lines are now open at 888-TALK. That's 888-8255. And now, The Point proudly brings you Tall Tales with Senator Bob Klitzkie.
A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. And I see the real Joe Cruz nodding his head affirmatively there in the control room, probably saying to himself, if Bob weren't here, I could say that too. Right, real Joe Cruz?
It would be my duty and my honor.
Of course, of course. So, no Second Amendment story time today, so we're going to go straight to Jemmy Ikutney. So we start out with the Daily News. The Daily News has an interesting editorial today about 3 people that brought down the shooter at Pensacola Naval Air Station. So it's a pretty good read, even if it doesn't meet the criteria for Tall Tales here. So if you haven't read it yet, not a bad idea, but it just doesn't rise to the level of even being close to Blue Star competition here on Tall Tales. Post doesn't exactly come out shining today either, telling a sad story, but I suppose one that needs to be told. The title of the editorial, "Let the tragedy of losing 2 teens in one crash be a lesson to all drivers. 3 families lost their son." That was the comment by Chief Prosecutor Basil O'Malley in the Superior Court Tuesday, and it aptly described the tragedy that was a result of an act of reckless driving one night in October 2018. In this case, 2 17-year-olds died. Josiah Bloss and Timothy Wee were students at Simon Sanchez High School when their lives were cut short. A friend of theirs, Javon Germain Titano, who was also still a teen at the time, was driving. Titano was driving at 76 miles per hour, or nearly twice the speed limit, at a time, nearly twice the speed limit, more than twice the speed limit, at a time when it was slippery on the snake-like road, according to court documents. When Titano lost control of the car and the vehicle slammed violently, finally resting as a badly mangled wreck. His friends didn't have a chance of surviving. On Tuesday, Titano was sent to prison for 5 years. He's 20 years old. He pleaded guilty to vehicular manslaughter in the deaths of his 2 friends. An irresponsible, misguided driver took our precious child away from us, said Ferdinand Wee, Timothy's father. Josiah's mother, Erica Bloss, submitted a written statement that was read at the sentencing for Titano, and in part it read, "The night I lost my son, I lost myself. Our lives have been shattered." No parent should have to bury their child. Sentence could have read, "No parents should have to bury their child in a senseless crash." and no young adult should spend his initial years as a grown-up behind prison bars. For Titano, no amount of regret can turn back the clock to the night when he chose to drive recklessly, resulting in the deaths of his two friends. Before Titano was sent to prison, he said in court, addressing the grieving families, "I wished I could have traded places. I wish it was me instead. From the bottom of my heart, I'm so sorry. I don't expect you to forgive me. I can't even forgive myself." The prosecutor said, while there's no indication Titano is a bad person, but Timothy and Josiah are still dead. Our hearts go out to the grieving families and other families that have lost loved ones in road crashes. We hope that all drivers will remember this tragedy and many other fatal traffic crashes on Guam that have devastated many families. Let's all drive safely. Let's find someone else to drive if we're unable to. Regret always comes last, and it will never take back the lives lost as a result of driving recklessly or while intoxicated. Well, all good points in Guam Daily Post. An editorial that plays on our empathy, sympathy, and on our empathy and on our sympathy. I wonder if anyone out there in the international radio listening audience will take that editorial to heart. The speed limit on Guam, according to statute, is 45 miles per hour unless it's marked lower. The chief of police had the ability to mark speed limits lower up until a couple years ago. That designation was then given to the Director of Public Works. But I think you'd have a hard time finding any highway on Guam that isn't marked to 35 miles an hour or slower. So I suppose that someone who didn't know would say, wow, small island, 35 miles an hour speed limit, you probably don't have very many traffic fatalities, right? And of course the answer would be, yes, we do. We have a lot of traffic fatalities. So I guess the Post makes a good point, not the kind of point that it takes to get a blue star, but the kind of thing that needs to be said from time to time anyhow, just to remind people that for most people, the most dangerous thing they ever do is in their whole lives is drive an automobile. If you're driving an automobile and you make a mistake, or someone else who's out there in the highway at the same time makes a mistake, it could cost you your life. It's just something to remember every time you get in your car and buckle up. This is the most dangerous thing that I'll probably ever do in my whole life. I kind of need to be careful. So that's Zemit Yakotny for today. We go from there to the card. Did you ever figure out how to do that, ring that bell to announce the card, Real Joe Cruz?
You know, I had it here and it disappeared. Let me look some more and see if I can find it.
Please do. Yeah, that should. And whenever we have an item on the card, there should be the ringing of a bell, just as though the bout were coming from Madison Square Garden. You know, that should be one of our sites. We're already at Churchill Downs and Wrigley Field. We ought to be doing the card remotely from Madison Square Garden. So I'll let you go ahead and do that. Before I get into the card, we get any anonymous letters today?
Not today, sir.
Oh, okay. Well, that anonymous letter we got yesterday kind of really put us in our places, didn't it?
True.
Yeah. Okay, so this is what I got on the card for today. I've got 12 Days of Christmas. This is the third of 12. I've got New York versus detainees. This is a special request from a caller who wanted to make his mark yesterday. I've got the Commonwealth of the Northern Mariana Islands versus Taurus. I've got a little bit more of United States of America versus Gods and Arrows. And I go down to pot versus traffic safety, U.S. versus China, and the left versus the Salvation Army, winding up with Antonio Gramsci versus Yall. So starting out with the 12 Days of Christmas, you'll remember on Monday I did the first day of Christmas. And the first day of Christmas, on the first day of Christmas, my true love gave to me a very scratchy throat. A partridge in a pear tree. Well, you know, the Find Law website said not such a good idea. Pear trees are a controlled substance if you live in California. You just can't go willy-nilly moving pear trees into California. And on the second day of Christmas, my true love gave to me 2 turtle doves. And not such a good idea either, because in some places, turtle doves are on the, for instance, in England, they're on the red list, protected. So then on the third day of Christmas, the third day of Christmas, and here's what Find Law says. Now we break the eggs. If these are good laying hens, you will walk right into the morass that is the current California versus Missouri interstate egg import-export law fight. And then there's a link to a website about the fight between Missouri and California over eggs. And the site winds up by saying, good clucking luck. So tomorrow, let's see, what do we got for tomorrow? For calling birds, maybe blackbirds. So you're going to have to wait till tomorrow to see what the problem is with 4 calling birds. Okay, yesterday we had a caller call in who wanted to make his mark, and he said that he had heard in California, for a lot of criminals, there will be no cash bails, that everybody's going to be ROR'd, released on recognizance, and asked me to take a look into it. So this is what I found out. New York's new state bail law should significantly reduce pretrial incarceration levels. A new bail law goes into effect on January 1 in New York. It will eliminate pretrial detention and cash bail as an option in an estimated 90% of arrests. For the remaining cases, judges will maintain the option of setting cash bail. For most misdemeanors, and nonviolent felonies, cash bail is no longer permitted. Judges must release individuals charged with those crimes with no cash bail, either on their own recognizance or with release conditions designed to ensure that the individual returns to court, such as pretrial supervision and text message reminders for court dates. For those charged with most serious crimes, including almost all violent felonies and certain nonviolent felonies, such as sex offenses and witness tampering, very little has changed in New York. In those cases, judges will retain the option to set cash bail. In addition, the law has not changed what judges are permitted to consider in setting bail. Unlike almost all states, judges in New York are not permitted to detain people due to concerns that they may pose a danger to the community if released. This part of the legislation is consistent with the long-standing rule in New York, which has prohibited the consideration of dangerousness in setting bail since 1971 in order to ensure that those charged with crimes like this are afforded the presumption of innocence. So, okay, I've got a lot to say about this, but I've already got a phone call from another Joe, right? He's got a season ticket, I think, doesn't he, Real Joe Cruz?
He does.
Yeah, so let's put him at the head of the line here. Good afternoon, another Joe.
I was hoping I had box seats. Where those specialized seats were.
Couple more calls. We'll see if we can upgrade you, another Joe.
Okay, so I'm curious if this has to do with a backlash towards Trump getting tough on illegal migrations across the border, and I don't know. Would they cross the border illegally? Is that the charge misdemeanor? I know the charge is, and so does that mean that that even though they're caught and they had crossed the border without the authorization, that means that they have to be released? Am I understanding that right, or is that wrong?
Well, people who cross the border illegally are not within the jurisdiction of the state in which they enter. The enforcement of immigration law falls to the Customs and Border Protection Agency, the Department of Homeland Security. It is a crime to cross the border illegally. I don't remember the degree of the crime. As a general principle, it's treated as a civil matter. So during the Obama administration, they had what they call catch and release. They caught somebody sneaking across the border in Arizona. They'd pick them up, detain them maybe overnight, put them on a school bus and take them to the nearest port of entry like Nogales or Douglas or someplace like that, and turn them loose to cross the border and try again later on. We do detain illegal entries, but they're not detained. The detention is subject to the Customs and Border Patrol. Now, oftentimes, the feds will have a contract with local jails so that federal detainees can be kept in local jails. But it's really two completely separate systems between the state.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks for the answer, Bob. Okay, thanks. I'll just hang up now. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks again, another Joe. Yeah, how many Joes do we have calling over here?
I lose track.
Yeah, a lot of Joes. This guy's a pretty good Joe, though. Yeah, as Joes go, right? So let's take a look at how we do it here. First of all, we have a release on a citation. And that's at HGCA Chapter 25. In any case where a person is not arrested upon a warrant and such person does not demand to be taken before a judge, the arresting officer or any other officer into whose custody the person is placed, instead of taking such person before a judge, may release him pursuant to the procedure provided in this chapter. In other words, he's given a citation. He's given a notice to appear, and often the notice to appear is 2 years from now. And if he doesn't appear, that's another offense. If he does appear, if the prosecutor has filed a formal charge in the meantime, then the criminal process begins. If the prosecution hasn't filed a charge, then the guy is turned loose, no harm, no foul. So a police officer has the same discretion that we're talking about here in New York for crimes in which the defendant is not arrested pursuant to a warrant, which is almost all crimes, very seldom. Most of our arrests are warrantless arrests. And the way that works is that a police officer can arrest someone if the police officer finds that there's probable cause to believe that a felony was committed and that this person committed the felony. That's all it takes, warrantless arrest. For a misdemeanor, the police officer probably has to see the crime being committed. Otherwise, it would result in the issuance of a citation. Now, in cases of felonies, we do have a procedure at Chapter 40 of AGCA And it says, at the first appearance before a judge of the Superior Court, every person charged with an offense shall be ordered released pending trial in the matter subject to conditions provided by 40.15, 40.20. And what that says is the judge shall order the person charged to be released on recognizance unless the judge determines in his discretion. Now, here's an error right here in the code. It says in his discretion. Should I read that as in their discretion? It's only one judge. Still in there, huh? In their discretion on the basis of available information that such release will not reasonably assure the appearance of the person as required or will endanger the safety of any other person or the community. So we're tougher on pretrial release than New York, although we start out with a proposition that everybody should be released unless a judge can find that the detainee is a substantial risk of not appearing or that he may pose a danger to the community. And then there's a long laundry list of things that the judge is to consider if he's not going to release the defendant on his own recognizance. So what New York has done is what they've really done is kind of set up a system like our citation system where people are released subject to a return date, and then there can be conditions of release. Just like under our system, oftentimes defendants are released. They are to check in with the pretrial services office at the court on a weekly basis or called in every day, or we're trying to get this ankle bracelet monitor system in place. Sometimes pretrial detainees are released to the custody of a third-party custodian. And if the defendant doesn't show up for trial, not only does the defendant have a problem, but the third-party custodian does also. So when you hear New York just abolished cash bail, at first it sounds like, wow, is California a county is New York a county of California? That sounds pretty liberal. But when you stop to think about it a little bit, maybe not so bad after all. But anyhow, Mark, that was your question, and that is my answer, and I'm sticking with it. Okay, next we have CNMI versus Torres, I hope. I can find that paper here. Just a second. Well, thanks to my super accurate filing system, I can't find that article, but both the Daily News and the Post covered it. And what it's about is this. We spent quite a bit of time last week on the FBI investigation of the governor of the Northern Mariana Islands, Ralph Torres, and several others, on several different potential investigation points, things like money laundering, etc. And in the process of doing that, other things came up that didn't put the governor in a very good light. So a couple of the Northern Marianas Islands legislatures, one named Probst and the other one named Tina Sablon, have been moving trying to get the CNMI House of Representatives to start an impeachment proceeding against Governor Ralph Torres. And there seems to be a great reluctance on the part of the CNMI House to begin those impeachment proceedings. I don't have anything more to say about that except what I read in the papers, but it really looks grim in the Northern Marianas with this gigantic Chinese casino, huge amounts of money, arguable misconduct on the part of public officials, and a legislature that doesn't seem to want to go forward in the face of what would be enough to pique anyone's curiosity. So I'll probably have more to say about that tomorrow. See if I can't bring that article with me. Oh, I found it. It's right here. Yeah, this is a story by Heidi Gilbert in the Daily News. Some lawmakers in the Commonwealth of Northern Marianas on Tuesday asked for a special legislative committee to investigate Governor Torres for allegations of public corruption, fraud, waste, and abuse of public funds. This comes a little over a month after the FBI executed multiple search warrants on Saipan, including at Torres' office on Capitol Hill and the office of the island's exclusive casino operator, Imperial Pacific International. The CNMI governor, in a statement Tuesday night, said the request is a coordinated attack against him and called it an obsession to take him down without regard to legal processes. With today's request, the House minority and their supporters want to further divide our community because of politics that seeks to disrupt a vision of a stronger and more prosperous Marianas, Torres said. The 6-member CNMI House of Representatives minority bloc asked Speaker Blas Jonathan Atau to appoint a special committee to investigate the governor. The recent FBI raids on the home and office of the governor and his associates and the revelations of lavish and questionable expenses charged by the governor or the people of the Commonwealth to the people of the Commonwealth have severely eroded public trust and the integrity of our government. We cannot and must not turn a blind eye, the minority bloc wrote in a 2-page letter to the Speaker. The Speaker had yet to decide on the request for an investigation committee, which the CNMI House rules allow. The 20-member CNMI House of Representatives has 13 Republicans. The rest are independents. 6 of the independents signed the letter which Saipan Representative Ed Probst read during Tuesday's House session. The CNMI is a bicameral legislature. Saipan Representative Tina Sablon, one of those who called for a special investigation, said this legislative process respects the criminal and legal process that's now underway. Sablon said the FBI has been conducting criminal investigation into Torres and his associates involving money laundering, fraud, and illegal campaign contributions. But we must also respect the public office we hold and our process for conducting legislative investigations and holding the governor accountable, Sablon said in her statement. Torres said the House minority's request demonstrates their obsession with taking down the governor that they simply do not like, as well as their inability to respect legal processes by instead passing judgment without full context. The governor's statement didn't specifically address the allegations. Torres called on the House minority to help address the CNMI's most pressing issues: growing the economy, stabilizing its finances, funding education and health care, winning the war on ICE, and ensuring the public safety and security. So that's the article in in the daily news. So this whole Saipan matter. Let's take a short break here. We'll come back to Saipan here in just a second.
Ever notice how that one perfect holiday gift is just out of reach? Or how sales on the stuff you want all come at the same time? This season, plan ahead with a holiday loan from First Hawaiian Bank. Now you can afford to be nice without being naughty. For more details, visit FHB.com or any branch to apply. Additional restrictions apply. First Hawaiian Bank, member FDIC, equal housing lender.
Are you ready for some football? The Ray Gibson Show has got your fix every day with the Points NFL Pick'em Contest. Get the latest updates as we check out the past week's performance and break down the upcoming action. Get your game on by calling the hotline at 888-TALK or sound off on Facebook Live at thepoint.gu. League members get a chance to win some awesome weekly prizes with a shot for your choice of a new GTA phone. The NFL Pick'em Contest is brought to you by Current Guam with special thanks to GTA.
Talk Tales with Bob Klitzkie is brought to you by Mescla. Try their featured special for December. Kahlua pork and cabbage, slow roasted smoked laced pork, shredded and sauteed with onions and cabbage, served with steamed rice and lomi lomi salmon. Try it today, available in Agotnya and in Tumon at the Grand Plaza Hotel. For reservations, please call 969-2652.
Yeah, so it looks like a real mess in Saipan. If you start out with the Bloomberg article and work forward from there, Bloomberg points out that the CNMI, the Imperial, what's it called? The Imperial... Imperial Pacific International Casino at one time had a larger handle, a multiply larger handle than the largest casino in Macau. And the casinos in Macau dwarf the casinos in Vegas. So how could all that money be coming through the Northern Merritt to a little remote island in the Western Pacific and that casino? Well, I explained how the Bloomberg article talked in terms of tours, so that people take tours to the casino, and they're able to change their renminbi, their Chinese money, into American money, and when it's time to come back to China, they've got American money. So could it be money laundering? Maybe. That's the kind of thing the FBI gets very interested in. And then there are a lot of labor violations connected with that casino. And then some allegations that some Northern Marianas officials were too close to the casino and the casino management. Too close, meaning Ralph Torres, the governor of the Northern Marianas. So a very dramatic search of several premises on Guam took place. The FBI searched the governor's office and his house and the casino, etc. And then in the process of doing this, some other stuff came up, that looked like the governor was playing fast and loose with public money to his own benefit. So that's why the minority in the legislature said, yeah, maybe we should impeach this guy. And the Republican majority doesn't seem to be moving too fast on this one. So it's going to be very interesting to watch this. I note with some interest that one of the publications here, a non-traditional publication, actually had a reporter on location in Saipan to look at this in the Northern Marianas legislature. That would be the publisher of a newspaper, a non-traditional newspaper that's already achieved 2 blue stars. So the name of that newspaper or that news outlet is Candid News. And I suspect that they're going to continue digging into what's going on at the Northern Marianas so that we could be informed here. And I think I have just, a caution to issue based on what's going on up there. Allowing that huge amount of money into a small island may not be the smartest thing we could do. We'll see how this all plays out. Okay, so we go from there to cockfighting. And I find this, as you might note, I find this very, very interesting because there are so many different facets to it. Now, the latest thing, if you're watching on Facebook, this ad appeared in today's Post, a full-page color ad. You're not talking chicken feed when it comes to a full-page ad in the newspaper. And there's a picture of a couple of fighting cocks in action. You can see the knife attached to the ankle of one of the chickens. And the overprint on the picture is, "A fight to the death is inhumane for the animals and illegal for the people." And this ad is put out by the Animal Wellness Foundation. And the small type says this: 2/3 of Guam's residents, according to the first ever comprehensive survey of public attitudes towards animals on island, oppose cockfighting and think it's wrong. So, assuming arguendo that that's correct, what result? If 2/3 of the people of the island think that cockfighting is wrong and they're opposed to it, what is the appropriate stance then for government officials? Would Amanda Shelton have the right approach? Introducing a resolution that says, we don't have anything to do whatsoever with enforcing this federal law, but in order to pander and posture, we're going to pass a resolution that says we're going to make this our lowest priority. And what do we make of the governor who, from the very beginning, said she was against this idea of banning cockfighting, and has, sort of done a little saber rattling about the federal law, and then come out and said to the mayors, don't bother to ask me for permits for cockfights because I'm not going to issue them. And then what do we do with the angry folks who would come forward and say, I've been cockfighting all my life. I learned cockfighting from my father and my grandfather. I ain't going to quit. Let the feds come out here and get me. It's part of my culture. What do we do with them? So we have this sort of, well, one of the dichotomies here is this the idea of advancing the C word, culture, as a rebuttal to argument about what's legal and what's illegal. And so let's examine that for a second. Now, we know that come the 20th of December, it's going to be illegal to participate in a cockfight, to own cockfighting tools like the knives, etc. It's going to be illegal even to watch a cockfight. And there's some potentially stiff penalties for anyone who violates this law. So how do we deal with that in the context of, yeah, but it's been part of the culture here for hundreds of years. Where do the feds get off? Where do the feds get off making it illegal? They don't have any sensitivity towards our culture. So that's one of the dichotomies. And then, of course, we hear the separatist cry. This just shows why we need to separate from the United States. Because, if they can come along here and tell us that we can't do cockfighting, We don't even have a say-so at all. We don't have any means of expressing what we want or don't want. We're just the victims here. Therefore, Guam ought to separate itself from the United States and be an independent country. Then we could have cockfights to our heart's content. There's that angle. And there's my angle. My angle is in a federal system, where the sovereign states delegated a certain amount of authority to the central government, which I used to call the federal government. Federal government only has powers that are delegated to it, and all of the other powers remain with the states or with the people. And for most of the existence of this country, criminal laws were local matters, and states decided what could be a crime within their borders. So, I could advance the argument that it should be up to the people in each of the states to determine how much cruelty to animals they're going to put up with. They might say, a state should have it within its prerogative to say, animals, shanimals. If they're not people, you could do with them whatever you want. I think that would be really at borders on evil, but that's the way the system was designed initially. So extrapolating from there, if that's the way the national system, our federal system was designed, one of the things that we ought to be stumping for is to be treated like a member of a federal system, as opposed to, for us, it's clearly a national government. There's no inherent sovereignty here. Guam is not a subordinate sovereign to the national government. The national government is not a recipient of any delegated authority from Guam. In fact, it's just the opposite. But I think one of the things we should insist on is to be treated the way a state would be treated. That if Guam were a state, it would be treated in a particular manner. So there's that angle. And then there's the angle that Tom Poole brought up the other day. Tom's a veterinarian. So, I have to defer to Tom's superior expertise when it comes to animals. Tom's devoted his professional life to animals. And Tom posed the question to me, well, we know that we can't be cruel to humans. What makes us think that it's okay to be cruel to animals, if you were to define cruel broadly? And my answer was, well, humans are sentient beings. That is, they're knowing and intelligent. Animals aren't. Tom comes back and puts me on my proofs and causes me to think and causes me to doubt that statement, because if you've ever owned a dog, that dog knows an awful lot. He knows maybe some respects more about you than you know about yourself. And that dog is capable of having feelings, and he's capable of interpreting your feelings, etc. So I don't know that my demarcation of humans sentient, animals not sentient, is a very good test. Another way of looking at it is this. There's a phrase that a term that I really like that I'm going to get a chance to use here, I think, and that's, and I'm going to hang it on Sabina Paris. I'm going to say that Sabina Paris's 37-page No More Cruelty to Animals bill, which I've talked about in some respects, shows that she's crying crocodile tears. Because I've gone into that bill in some respects, and it's very comprehensive. No cruelty to animals. She even gets in no bestiality. And no cruelty to animals, and severe penalties. And anyone who is cruel to animals is caught, goes to court, could be sentenced, and if he's after his sentence, he could wind up with mental health counseling. So, short break leading up here to our halftime break.
GRMC's Neuroscience and Neurology Department treats a wide spectrum of disorders associated with the nervous system, spine, and brain. Some of the more common disorders include seizures, epilepsy, dementia, sleep disorders, migraine, and stroke, which is one of the leading causes of death on Guam. GRMC's neuroscience team is equipped with the latest technology and the finest neurological doctors. To make an appointment, contact GRMC Specialty Clinics at 645-5500.
When's the last time you looked at your homeowner's insurance?
We buy a homeowner's policy and never give it another thought until something happens. Life brings changes, and our coverage needs can change. The smart thing to do is get the answers and level up our insurance to make sure we're totally protected.
That's the Insurance Extra Point. Get out there and make something good happen today by calling Guahan Insurance Services at 475-1162 or visit us at the Camacho Landmark Center in Tamuning.
Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie is brought to you by Bank Pacific, banking on the Pacific for 65 years.
Okay, so we got about 9 more minutes till that big halftime show that you all have come to know and love so well. And I was talking about crocodile tears, and I'm going to nominate Senator Sabina Paris as one who cries crocodile tears. She's got an elaborate no cruelty to animals bill. And lays it out very, very clearly and is protecting all the animals, but except for for fighting cocks. And there's a special exemption. Cockfighting's okay. So the term crocodile tears comes from crocodile tears is a term that means superficial sympathy. A false, insecure display of emotion, such as a hypocrite crying fake tears of grief. The phrase derives from an ancient belief that crocodiles shed tears while consuming their prey, and as such is present in many modern-day languages, especially in Europe, where it was introduced through Latin. So a crocodile, will latch on to that guy who fell out of the canoe, and while he's chowing down on the canoeist, will cry crocodile tears. So Sabina Paris puts together these elaborate legislative findings in this elaborate bill about no cruelty to animals and cries crocodile tears as she eats the chicken. Yeah, that's going to go to the cockfight. So there's that dimension. How is it that some of us make such a fuss about cruelty to animals, and then we can tolerate cockfighting? And I mentioned the other day, I suppose there are different, if you got a really sharp knife and you split hairs, maybe there are different ways of slicing it. For instance, chickens aren't really animals, so it's okay to be cruel to chickens. Or if the chicken wins the cockfight, he'll be spared. He gets to live. So after Tom got me thinking, I did a lot of research here, and I've got some materials here. I've got some stuff from the People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, and I've got some other stuff here. Equality and the Interests of Animals. So I want to spend a little time working on that after the big halftime show. But I think leading up to the halftime show, I'm just going to take a quick look through the Facebook posts that we have here. Nate Horn's in and tells us that tomorrow is Friday. And Tedo says, you think Trump will be impeached? Yes, I do. I think Trump will be impeached. And I think I made a pretty definitive ruling yesterday, which I will repeat. I read the grounds for impeachment from the Constitution as the Constitution was adopted and then how the living Constitution boys would read it. As adopted, Article 2, Section 4, the President, Vice President, and all civil officers of the United States shall be removed from office on impeachment for and conviction of treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. Now, that's the way the Constitution was written, and I've mentioned that lefties say, well, yeah, that was then, but this is now. We have a living Constitution because we're so much smarter now than, that the guys that wrote the Constitution back then. We know so much more, and we can do a much, much better job. So we write the Constitution kind of as we go along. And their interpretation would be this: the president shall be removed from office on impeachment for and conviction of treason, bribery, other high crimes and misdemeanors, and a crappy personality. So when you come right down to it, that's why they're on Trump. They don't like his personality. He doesn't play the game the way they want him to play the game. He doesn't get into political correctness. I would imagine that if Trump were talking about his vice president, Mike Pence, he might refer to Mike Pence as he or him. Horror of horrors. When everyone knows that a president who is referring to his vice president ought to be calling him what, Real Joe Cruz?
They.
Of course. So Trump just doesn't get any of this stuff. And they hate it because he's not one of them. So, they started out with quid pro quo, and then they didn't like that. That didn't go very well with their focus groups because it's too hard for the average citizen to come to grips with. They went from there to bribery, and then what they settled on was, well, we don't like the way he's doing the office. That's basically what they said. He's not as good a president as we think we should have. And then he's not falling in step. He's not helping us impeach him. So it's kind of like, your enemy says, I'd really like to cut off your foot, but I couldn't find my axe. So you're a good friend of mine. Can I borrow your axe so that I can cut off your foot? It's kind of what, and they're saying because Trump wouldn't lend them an axe, he should be impeached. So what the Democrats are doing here is political, and what it really comes down to is this, that no one can second-guess the House of Representatives. If the House of Representatives comes up with articles of impeachment, you can't file suit in the district court, or you can't appeal to the Supreme Court. And horror of horrors, you can't even go to the United Nations, which is the dispenser of all justice, right, Real Joe Cruz?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So if the House of Representatives brings in articles of impeachment, that's it. And whether or not the articles make any sense or they're in line with the Constitution doesn't make any difference. So the real key is, will Trump be convicted at the Senate? I'll pick up on this a little bit after the big halftime show.
The Point is KUSG, Hagåtña, Guam, 93.3 FM and 104.3 HD3.
Working on the wording. I'm Jack Callahan, Fox News. The House Judiciary Committee starting to craft the language of the articles of impeachment. Judiciary Committee Chairman Jerry Nadler.
We cannot rely on an election to solve our problems when the president threatens the very integrity of that election.
The committee's ranking Republican Georgia Congressman Doug Collins saying, though, the process has been unfair from the start.
If the minority has no rights, and one day this majority will be back in the minority, and they will be crying and screaming for minority rights to be upheld. And I will just point back to 2019 and say, this is the year you put a dagger in minority rights.
Just statements Wednesday night by each member of the committee. The actual working of the markup of the bill starts in the morning. The Inspector General testified to the Senate Judiciary Committee on Wednesday.
There is no planet on which I think this report indicates that things were okay within the FBI in connection with this investigation. They most certainly were not.
Utah Senator Mike Lee stunned that the FBI's former director could claim the report cleared the FBI of wrongdoing. Inspector General Michael Horowitz said the FBI made a series of mistakes in the investigation of the Russian election meddling in the 2016 election. Probing the New Jersey shooting attack on Tuesday, investigators reportedly seeing signs pointing to anti-Semitism.
The local, state, and federal officials are quite tight-lipped to this point about why David Anderson and Francine Graham killed an officer and targeted a Jewish supermarket. But authorities are looking into the killer's connection to the Black Hebrew Israelites, which have been labeled a hate group. New Jersey Attorney General Gerber Graywall says another killing may come into play.
Anderson and Graham are our prime suspects in the Bayonne Uber driver killing.
That man was Michael Rumberger, found dead in a car trunk over the weekend. That death and the motive for the Tuesday attack are still being investigated.
That's Fox's Gernal Scott. America is listening to Fox News.
We can't buy this house.
What?
It has 4 bathrooms. Just think of all the bathtub rings, water spots, and stains, plus the cleaning products I'll have to buy.
Didn't I tell you? The house comes with a non-electric Connecticut water treatment system. We'll have clean, soft water throughout the house, protect the water-using appliances, keep the tub, showers, and sinks looking like new, and help our skin, hair, and clothes look and feel great, too. The house even includes a Connecticut drinking water system.
A Connecticut system in the house? We'll take it.
American Water Tech, a passion for improving lives through better water.
The holiday season is here, and it gives us pause to reflect on the abundance of 2019 and to express our gratitude for Guam, the island we call home, and to all Guamanians. Our team here at Security Title is proud of the work we do to support ourselves and our families, to serve and care for our customers, and to give back to our community. May this season of joy and the new year bring happiness, good health, and prosperity to you and yours. Merry Christmas from all of us at Security Title.
Authorities in New Zealand confirm 16 people are dead after the White Island volcano erupted, while a group of nearly 50 tourists were visiting on Monday. New Zealand volcanic geologist Graham Leonard says continuing tremors on the island could indicate another eruption is imminent.
There is an ongoing, consistent trend in increasing tremor. So far, this has contributed to an increase in the likelihood of eruption estimates each day. Today is less safe than yesterday and the day before.
Recovery teams say they'll begin on Friday the task of retrieving the bodies of 8 people still on the island. White Island's been visited by tourists since 1953, attracting over 10,000 people every year. California grappling with its homeless crisis. Now one city has an interesting idea on how to fix it.
It's Oakland City Council President Rebecca Kaplan who said at a council meeting this week a cruise ship might be a good place to house the homeless. The ship would be at the port of Oakland, could hold up to 1,000 people, and those people would pay for rooms on the ship based on their income. She'll have a full proposal ready by January. Already, this is getting pushed back. The Port of Oakland is among the 10 busiest in the United States. A spokesman there says there's not enough infrastructure to berth a cruise ship. John Saucier, Fox News.
The final scheduled execution of 2019 has taken place in the state of Texas, where 46-year-old Travis Runnels was lethally injected. He'd slashed a prison guard's throat back in 2003. He chose not to make a final statement. Blue Origin, the space company owned by Jeff Bezos, has scored another successful space flight. Using the same rocket for the 6th time in West Texas, the suborbital flight exposing the capsule and its contents, including NASA experiments, artwork, and a commercial grapevine study. To more than 3 minutes of weightlessness, the capsule reached a peak altitude of 65 miles, just above the official threshold for space. I'm Jack Callahan. This is Fox News.
Wow, nice smile. So perfect and all.
Thanks. I owe it all to Dr. Robert Yang and his smile team. They do wonders for a healthy, happy mouth.
Got teeth? Don't wait until they hurt. Schedule your routine checkup and cleaning with Dr. Yang and his smile team. Suite 119 in the East West Business Center, Upper Tumon. Call 647-8702 or 3.
The best thing that happened to teeth since toothpaste.
Dr. Yang and his smile team.
They make smiles happen.
Now here's Bob in the traffic chopper. What's up, Bob?
Traffic's at a standstill right now with a guy standing in the middle of the street holding a sign. Let me zoom in. The sign says, "Free the fence."
Free the fence. And what does that mean, Bob?
Not sure, but the guy's out there smiling and waving in short shorts with a weird-looking little hat. He's got a sign in one hand and what looks like, is it? What? It is. It's a bottle of beer in the other.
Oh, no. That's Ray.
Free the fences in your mind with The Ray Gibson Show. Weekday mornings from 6 to 10 on 93.3 The Point.
Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie is brought to you by Bank Pacific, banking on the Pacific for 65 years.
So, there we are again after that gigantic halftime show that you all have come to know and love so well. And we're back at the cockfight. So, there's, I don't know exactly how to say this, but there's some sort of like philosophical questions that need to be dealt with here. And I want to get into that a little bit, and I'm going to be kind of pursuing this as someone who has not made up his mind about the ethical questions here and the philosophical questions. Although I think I've made up my mind about cockfighting. I don't think cockfighting, as a person who lives in this territory, using a military analogy, I don't think it's the hill that I want to die on. We've obviously incurred some people who are very serious, putting full-page colored ads in the Post, send this guy out here, the fellow who's in charge, Wayne Pacell. So we're obviously on their radar, and we're obviously going to get a fair amount of press out of this. And the way it works is this. If all of a sudden we said, yeah, that's a good point, maybe we should not do any more cockfighting. And by the way, we haven't issued a cockpit license in over a year. We don't license cockfights. We don't regulate it. I have a feeling we're not even scratching the surface on taxing it. So if we let it go, that would be the end of the story. But the more we have the Amanda Sheltons of the island coming along and saying, it's an unfunded federal mandate, and it's our lowest priority for enforcement, when, of course, it's not an unfunded federal mandate. And, of course, we don't have any role in enforcing it anyhow. All of this posturing by public officials, oh, it's part of the culture. And, you know, why do people in Washington think they can tell us what to do? The more of that goes on, the more press we're going to get. So do we want to be, do we want to get up on the skyline? Is that place where they still do cockfighting? Do we want that to be our claim to fame? You saw how out of control the whole tree snake thing went. Somebody from the New York Times must have read an old article, and now everybody in the mainland thinks that If you walk down the street in Guam, brown tree snakes are just festooned from the branches of the trees, and you'd see in the space of 2 blocks, you'd see 400 snakes. When, of course, the reality is a whole lot different. I haven't seen a live snake for about 5 years, and I haven't seen a dead one for about 3, because unless you go out in the boonies looking for them, you're not going to find them. So I'm saying that there's that dimension here. Is this what we want to be known for, that we are fighting so vigorously to protect our cockfights that even in the face of a draconian federal law, our public officials are going to pull an Amanda Sheldon? Something to think about. But let's find out Chris, what can you tell me about cockfighting?
Afade betu como malakao.
Ungan na zahago.
Ungan malakzo. So, I'm going to request permission to use famous Senator Bob Klitzkie. Taxes, schmatches. We don't need to pay them.
Granted, you have permission to do that.
I've been fighting for that for a long time. As a matter of fact, I was on with Ray about a month ago on the issue of the limited gaming tax for the hospital, and I'm sure he tried to get a hold of our good friend, former Speaker B.J. Cruz, on the accumulation of what the remittances should be for the taxes on all the gaming going on with regard to the machines. I mentioned during that show that the taxes for the other limited gaming, which I authored, not to include the gaming machines, has been raking in approximately $2.2 to $2.4 million annually. In fact, our good friend Ray had a contributor to his Facebook post saying, hey, the machines are employing a lot of people, they're paying payroll, they're doing all this, and I think you and I both know, Bob, that those gaming machines are raking in way more money than the other bingo, which is the what you can buy at the various markets and try to win a lottery type bingo, the bingos that are going on in the bingo halls and the like. And still there is, and there was, over the last 5 to 6 years, in terms of the accumulation of those revenues for the hospital, far inferior to what the other limited gaming is bringing in. So I continue to challenge that issue and the cockfights. That's not even on the radar as far as what those remittances are for the thousands, hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions of dollars that are exchanging hands. And without taking a position on the issue, just saying, look, if you're going to have it and you have it, tax it. Just like the whole purpose for some of the cannabis proponents, this is going to save us, tax it, and let us do good things with it. But to date, I think that the hospital remittances are way short of what even the limited gaming in the other side of the house, outside of those machines, which I think you may agree with me is far inferior in terms of the take. I know the kind of money that's being created with those machines, and I think it's a farce in terms of what's being remitted to the hospital. But permission to go backwards towards impeachment, if you would give me just a few minutes.
So ordered.
Thank you, sir. I would salute you if I was in front of you, or you would salute me, because you're a higher rank. And I would salute back. But, on the impeachment thing, I watched with interest that whole thing. A great bit of it, just because it was interesting in terms of the hearing, particularly with those professors. And the thing that got me the most, and because of your law acumen, I want to see if you agree with me or not, was, of course, you had 3-1 in terms of how the Democrats put forward their professors from the various universities to opine on whether or not the president has risen to that level of high crimes and misdemeanors for impeachment. What I found interesting was, you mentioned earlier about the founders, was that the 3 Democrat professors, and the other professor, by the way, I'm sure you were aware, was a Democrat also and didn't even vote for Trump, but was the most sober in terms of his analysis.
Jonathan Turley.
3, yeah, exactly. The other 3, what struck me was they didn't only believe in a living constitution, they had a time machine. They constantly referred back to what the framers meant. And I was like, I don't know if I'm just on a tangent here, but the juxtaposition there is really funny. And maybe you can opine to me on the legal position of, if you want a living document, but then you constantly refer the framers who were frozen in time to put those articles in, isn't that kind of a weird analogy?
Well, it would be coming from anyone but a lefty. And the number one rule for a leftist is that there are no rules.
Right. And that's why it was just so fun to watch the fact that even though he was the 1 against 3, the gentleman professor who didn't even vote for Trump and was a registered Democrat, basically just said, look, you guys you're off base here. And to listen to so many references to the framers was just interesting to me, for those who talk about a living document, because I think the framers thought the language they were putting in would be efficient and effective enough to not be abused and stretched and taken all over the universe in order to be able to make a case for, as some of them.
So,
one of the professors said that President Trump should be impeached for tweeting.
So the 3 then are living Constitution boys, but are playing against type by going back and trying to be originalists, kind of like Sabina Paris being right out there in the forefront of kindness to animals, but condoning cockfighting. It's the same kind of phenomenon, isn't it?
It really is. I mean, and they're really, and I heard earlier, I think Ray was talking about this morning, that Puerto Rico is trying to get a stay on it on the basis of, there are those who are so invested in the business of cockfighting that they actually have, loans due to banks or whatever loan institutions gave them, financing to be able to operate a cockfighting industry, and we'll see where that goes. But the fact of the matter is, I agree with you. I mean, you either do it or you don't do it. I mean, to go half-heartedly in there, it reminds me of the build-up situation. Call for a pause, try to get the press out of it, and try to get the political gain out of it, and then just turn around and not necessarily follow through and just say what you really mean, which is, I am not for this build-up. It's this tactic and this these kind of maneuvers, I think the people are just tired of, and would really appreciate it if the folks would just get back to the business of dealing with our hospitals, getting police officers on the street, and putting corrections officers in place, and taking care of our island.
I agree, Chris. Going back to the 3 and the 1 at the impeachment hearing, the 1 is named Jonathan Turley, and I had the opportunity to shake and howdy with Jonathan Turley because he was out here a couple years ago and spoke to our annual bar meeting.
Nice.
He is quite a guy. He has a column. I read his column every day, and he wrote up like a 50-page testimony that I have that I've been gradually wading through, and it's all very thoughtful and very clear as to the position that he takes. And he did start out by saying, hey, I'm a Democrat. I voted for Hillary. I don't like a lot of the stuff that Trump does. But, you know, the harm that you guys could do by rushing to impeachment here on insufficient grounds is going to go on for a long, long time. So you really ought to pull up and ask yourself what you're doing. And he's exactly right. He's a smart guy. And he's not really on, quote, on our side if you read his stuff. He's a little bit on the liberal side, but he makes it really hard to be a doctrinaire conservative if you read his stuff because he's so thoughtful.
Well, Bob, you and I have had a chance at the dais, if you will. And, of course, to accentuate one's position, you always try to, you know, provide questions that would lead to the dialogue you're trying to have. I even noticed when the Republicans were basically throwing out whatever bait they had, you know, which was good bait. It was factual bait. Even avoided that. If you want that interpretation, you have it. Whatever else. But the other three could not help themselves but so embellish, and it looked so scripted to the point to where one of them actually took a shot at President Trump's 13-year-old son. I thought that was completely below the belt. And it just showed that the bias was just so, I mean, what was interesting is I was watching some of these hearings with a friend of mine who honestly gets upset with me when we talk about politics. We have a friendship relationship, but not a political relationship. And she actually said, this is crazy. And I go, wait a minute. If that convinced you, then I know I'm on the right track. Because, like I said, this is somebody that every once in a while gets upset at me for watching, you know, these hearings all the time and stuff like that. But was like, wait a minute. It was an eye opener for me to know that somebody who honestly just gets irritated by all this stuff was like, wait a minute. And took interest and saw just a complete bias from those three Democrat panels that was just really, really over the top. In closing, Bob, if you would indulge me, about 4 months ago when I was doing Ray's show, I made an observation that I called it the 3 Bs, and I think it's going to end this way. I just wanted to see if you agree with me. I think the Democrat side is going to be the 3 Bs, being Biden, Buttigieg, and Bernie Sanders. Do you think that that's going to bear out?
I mean, it'll be those three jousting for the nomination down the home stretch?
Or at a brokered convention.
Yeah. Well, you know, people keep whispering in my ear that you can't count out Michelle, that Michelle has very quietly set the stage to come sweeping into the convention and breaking the apparent deadlock between the liberals and the conservatives and waltzing out of there with a nomination.
That will be an interesting move, and it will be interesting to see the reaction from that. And you and I have been around a couple of political strategy meetings. I would think that would be designed so that she doesn't get damaged by the process.
Right. Exactly.
That would be like just an abbreviated campaign, 60 to 75 days. No, not having to debate that much, not having to really understand the issues, but just run a popularity contest.
Well, imagine a real convention. You know, conventions have at one time used to be used to nominate presidents, nominate candidates, but the primaries have become so frequent that oftentimes by the time you get to the convention that we already know who the nominee is. But imagine a situation where no candidate is able to put himself in that position before the convention starts. And imagine the chairman of the Democrat Party calling the convention to order. And then imagine a roar arising from the crowd as Michelle Obama strolls down the aisle to say hello to the chairman of the Democrat Party. I mean, no campaign, no downside risk, just Michelle the savior.
I tell you what, I could see it.
Just get a couple of Hollywood directors and musical directors to choreograph the whole thing. And because if I look at, the three that you mentioned, they all have such huge negatives, even within their own party, that it doesn't seem like any one of them could muster anything that looked like a majority of the votes for the nomination.
Totally agree with you. I think that's why Warren is falling off into the distance. We saw the exit of Kamala, who was probably the stand-in for Miss Obama, and so the bottom line is that I completely agree with you. Once Elizabeth Warren had to start explaining to the people, and I got to give some of the left media a little bit of credit here. They did break her down, whether they just didn't like her and wanted Biden to be out there or whatever else it was, but they broke her down hard on explaining her position on a lot of her liberal policies, and I think that's why she faded. Bernie, of course, has the same possible fate, and we know the fate of the others, but the other two, Buttigieg and Biden, are struggling for centrist of votes to stay in the center while trying to win a nomination. So I think you summed it up real well. It's such a tragedy for them, and you could see that the Democrats and the liberal media is trying to destroy Trump before the election just because they really have no candidate.
Right. So I guess one thing becomes more and more clear, and that is that Elizabeth Warren is not going to be living in the white wigwam.
I don't believe so. I think she may as well. Who's that guy on Discovery Channel? She may as well build a wigwam treehouse, because I think that's the only place she's going to be going to, not the White House.
Right. Well, great talking to you, Chris.
You too, my friend. Take care.
Thanks for calling. Former Senator Chris Duenas, who has also guest hosted on the Ray Gibson Show. So, a lot of folks have been senators, but to be a guest host on the Ray Gibson Show, yeah, that takes some talent. Okay, so back to cockfighting here. I went to the website for this animal rights outfit, the Animal Wellness Action, and there's a report from Wayne Pacell when he went to the Dadido cockpit in September. And I'm not going to read the whole thing. I'll read a little bit of it, though. He said he had a little difficult finding it. He found the cockpit, found the way in. It cost him $5 to get inside. And he said, I just paid my admission fee of $5, and in the plexiglass enclosed pit, the roosters jumped and kicked at each other down let's see, this doesn't make sense. One bird dealt a cutting blow to his combatant with a 3-inch blade fastened to his leg. The victim was gasping. He had beautifully colored feathers, a downed animal unable to defend himself as the assault continued. The referee called it. The handler picked up the triumphant rooster, flashing a smile to the crowd. The other handler picked up his dying bird by the neck, etc. Unfortunately, the way this printed out, it cut off part of the article. Let's see what I've got here on the second page. He talks about someone named Marion Look Jameson, who in the news releases apparently grew up on Guam. Marion Look Jameson. Now, I don't know Marion Look Jameson, and I know everybody out there in the international radio or the local radio listening audience is saying, is that the cousin of Dwight Look? Or, did Dwight Look have any children? So I don't know who Marion Look Jameson is, but the guy says, on my first full day, my host, Marion, and me, Marion put me in touch with a street smart Guamanian. we met at a local cockfight, Sunday cockfight would take place. And let's see. All 50 states forbid cockfighting, but not all the territories. So my trip to Guam presented a rare opportunity to see the cockfight in action. So anyhow, I've got to get a better copy of this. I'll bring a better copy tomorrow so I can read this guy's impressions of a cockfight. Time for the 7th inning stretch. We'll be right back.
We understand what matters to you because at Docomo Pacific, we're a family too. With the Now Family program, Mom, Dad, and kids stay connected on the latest devices the whole family can enjoy. For just $155 a month, get 3 lines with 30 gigs of 4G LTE data each, and endless use of your favorite apps without affecting your monthly data bucket. Add more, get more, save more. Docomo Pacific, better together. Some conditions apply.
You're in the middle of a rant, and it's not yours. You want to be polite. You want to redirect the conversation. You need to make some progress. I'm Jerry Robertson at 7:20 a.m. on The Ray Gibson Show, how to break through when in the midst of a typhoon of words.
You can find daily transcripts of The Extra Point at guamtraining.com. Tune in every weekday morning at 7:20 for The Extra Point with Jerry Roberts. Brought to you by Guahan Insurance Services and First Hawaiian Bank on 93.3 The Point.
Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie is brought to you by American Water Tech, a passion for improving lives through better water.
So here we are, center field bleachers, Wrigley Field, Chicago, 7th inning stretch. That means I've got 2 more innings of Tall Tales here. I'm going to probably spend most of it in the cockpit because there's a lot to talk about here. One, I think Nate Horn says, has this guy never been to a cockfight? That's what happens. And unfortunately, I didn't print his report very well. So that you could kind of see it through his eyes. But apparently, no, he said he had never been to a cockfight before. And I suppose that's a way one could then say, well, then why is he criticizing it if he's never been to a cockfight before? And I suppose there's some validity in that. So going back to Tom Poole's query, you know, how is it that we are so sure that humans have rights, but that animals don't have rights? So I'm going to start out with the argument that animals do have rights, and I take that from something that I found coming from PETA, People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals. And the PETA folks will tell you that there is something called speciesism that we should be alert to, and we should not succumb to it. Speciesism is a form of discrimination based on membership. It involves treating members of one species as morally important than the members of other species, even when their interests are equivalent. More precisely, speciesism is the failure to treat equally because the species of which the individual has been classified as belonging to. The term is often used by people who state that species is similar to the way treatment of individuals is predicated on group membership and morally irrelevant physical differences. They state that species membership has no moral significance. Only the animal's interests have moral significance. It's thought that speciesism plays a role in inspiring or justifying the use of animal entertainment. An example of speciesist belief would be the following. Suppose that both a pig and a cow need their tails removed for medical reasons. If one believes that the pig, the dog, and the cow have equivalent interests, but insists that the dog receive pain relief for the operation, yet it is fine with the cow's tail being removed without pain relief, remarking, "It's just a cow." This belief is speciesist because the cow's species membership is being used as a justification for disregarding their interest in not suffering intense pain. It's possible to give more consideration to members of one species than to another without being a speciesist. For example, consider the belief that a typical human has an interest in voting, but that a typical something else doesn't. That belief can involve starting with the premises that certain feature of being, such as being able to understand and participate in a political system in which one is a political representative, is relevant no matter the being species. For someone holding this belief, a test for whether the belief is speciesist would be whether they would believe a gorilla could understand and participate in a political system in which she had a political representative and would have an interest in voting. There are a few common speciesist paradigms. Without going into this too far, Peter Singer is the prime mover of PETA, People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals. And he says that all species should be entitled to equal treatment. So, you know, we are genus Homo species sapiens. We're Homo sapiens. And there are other species, you know, like Tom mentioned orangutans and various other species in the mammalian kingdom that we should treat just as well as we treat our fellow man. And according to Singer, if we don't, then we are speciesists. And this is not a good place to be. So I probably ought to spend a little more time and explain this more clearly, because this PETA is a very strong organization, you know. No more Ringling Brothers Barnum and Bailey circus, because treating elephants and the other circus animals is a classic example of speciesism. And it's just not ethical for one species to use another species for its entertainment. This is kind of the essence of speciesism, or for food or for clothing or anything else. So I think that the PETA folks are pretty far out there, pretty close to the lunatic fringe, but they are a powerful organization and they have a following. And like so many strange ideas, there's a little logic in some of the positions that they take. I go from there to Immanuel Kant, actually pronounced Kant, but I like to pronounce it Kant. Immanuel Kant, if you know anything at all about philosophy, he's the guy that came up with the categorical imperative. And this is what Immanuel Kant says, a famous German philosopher. We have no obligation to animals. Kant was an opponent of utilitarianism who wrote 70 years before John Stuart Mill. Kant's categorical imperative, the formula of the end in itself, is act as to treat humanity both in your own person and in the person of every other, always at the same time as an end and never simply as a means. Basically, this means we should respect people by not using them in ways that they would not consent to. And of course, the word consent is a tough one to deal with sometimes. We should respect people because they are autonomous. Autonomy is the freedom that human beings have to pursue their own ends. Kant believed that autonomy was extremely valuable, but in order to have it, one must have free will, which requires having self-consciousness and the ability to be guided by reason. But animals, according to Kant, are not autonomous. Therefore, the categorical imperative does not apply to them. So I'm going to adopt this as for my Tom Pool argument. Animals are not self-conscious, and they are merely are there merely as a means to an end. The end is man. Thus, we have no direct duty to animals. That is, we have no duty to respect or foster the ends of the animals. However, if any acts of animals are analogous to human acts and spring from the same principles, we have duties towards animals because thus we cultivate the corresponding duties towards human beings. Our duties to animals are indirect and derived from our duty to respect and foster the ends of humanity. This is the traditional animal rights doctrine. If he is not to stifle his own feelings, he must practice kindness towards animals, for he who is cruel to animals becomes hard also in his dealings with men. We can judge the heart of a man by his treatment of animals. And then another guy, Carl Cohen, comes along and says, a right is a claim or a potential claim that one party may exercise against another. Now, this is a very lawyer-like approach to it. The differing targets, contents, and sources of rights and their inevitable conflict together weave a tangled web. Notwithstanding all such complications, this much is clear about rights in general. They are, in every case, claims or potential claims within a community of moral agents. Rights arise and can intelligibly be defended only among beings who actually do or can make moral claims against one another. Whatever else rights may be, therefore they are necessarily human. Their possessors are persons, human beings. Non-animals are not beings capable of exercise or responding to moral claims. Animals therefore have no rights and they can have none. The holder of rights must be the capacity to comprehend rules of duty governing all, including themselves. Including such rules, the holder of rights must recognize the possible conflicts between what is in their best interest and what is just. Humans have such moral capabilities. They are, in a sense, self-legislative. So, Cohen sums up, a right is a claim that one party may exercise against another. Rights exist only among things who can make animal beings who can make claims against one another. The attributes of human beings that gives rise to their abilities to make moral claims against others are lacking in animals. So, you know, without going into this too far, does the does the rabbit have a right not to be eaten by the lion? How does that all sort out? That's kind of what Cohen is driving at here. So I'm going to come back to this in a minute. I'm glad Dr. Tom Pool called. Good afternoon, Dr. Tom Pool. Hey, you caused a lot of trouble, Dr. Tom Pool.
I'm sorry, Judge.
You made me think.
I'm sorry, and I'm sorry I wasn't able to call in. I've been teaching a class at UOG, and so a friend of mine told me, he said, "Hey, you need to call in on the judge." But I've as I was driving home from UOG in the last few minutes, I've been listening to you, and of course I'm very familiar with Peter Singer and what he's written in Kant, and I think Kant's an idiot, and I think his arguments are pretty easily set aside. And I don't agree with everything Peter Singer said, but one of the points that I would like to mention over what you were just saying is that in those descriptions that because an animal can't enter into a contract, he has no rights or whatever, then it begs the question, well, what about human infants? Or what about people that are in comas? Or what about prisoners? Have they given away their rights? Can we do anything we want to them? What if someone is unintelligent for one reason or another through an injury? Do they lose all of their rights based on their inability to participate in contracts? And of course, clearly not. So I think that argument is specious and easily put aside. The more difficult one, I think, is the one that you just mentioned, and that is, do we have a right to eat animals? And I think that perhaps we do, based on the fact that that seems to be how God set things up. And whether you believe in God or not, and I certainly do, that seems to be the rules on this planet. I read once that if you live in the ocean, that your odds, your chance of dying any other way except in the jaws of something else are less than 1 in 1 billion. So clearly, if anyone put this thing together, the idea of having a right to not get eaten was not considered. But I do think that pain is a different thing, and that is it right for a tiger to eat a lamb? Yes, and he can't do it any other way than the way he does it. But if you have the ability to control pain, to limit pain, then you also have the moral obligation to do that. And so I really think we can dispense with whether we eat animals or not and just confine ourselves. Do we have a moral obligation to protect animals from pain? Like the argument you were talking about with the cow's tail or the dog's tail.
Yeah, you know, and there's something else that I think plays into it that I don't want to get too deeply into this stuff. It's rather complicated, but there was a guy named Holfeld who was kind of like a legal philosopher, and he defined rights as the correlative of duties. If you can't find a right in A unless you find a duty in B, which the lefties don't like because they think that all rights come from the government. So as far as humans are concerned, humans are able to assume and exercise a duty, and that corresponds to the right in somebody else. Now, I hadn't thought of it in terms of those who, you know, are perhaps non-communicative, in a coma, babies or whatever. But I think, you know, the kind of the legal fiction there is that the fact that they are humans gives rise to certain duties in other humans. Now, whether that set of duties also applies to animals, I don't know. Because, you know, what we're really talking about here is this, you know, I think you and I agree that eating animals, that's way over the top for Peter Singer. But is it moral to use animals for our entertainment? You know, like the elephants in the Ringling Brothers Barnum and Bailey Circus, or the orca whales at SeaWorld and things like that, that, you know, they pretty well stamped out.
I know, and I think that is a more difficult question. In my own just personal opinion, and I'm not sure that I could defend this very well, but I think it is okay as long as those animals are well cared for. And the argument that I would make is that rather than getting lost in the morality of it, the reality of it is that by letting people experience those animals, they're much more likely to care about those animals, care if their habitat is destroyed and that sort of thing. And that's why I think we lose a lot when we wipe out Barnum and Bailey, because, you know, the exposure people had to those animals is basically gone now. And it's, I think, really important for the animals that that's their exposure to humans, and humans are the ones destroying their habitat. But I would insist that they be well cared for, and I think that's okay. For example, the tigers we have at Sandcastle, I know are well cared for. And would they maybe be better off in the wild and that sort of thing? Well, maybe. I'm not even sure if you gave them the vote they would choose that, perhaps. But the reality of it is that their habitat is getting eliminated, and people they have more, I think, empathy with the animals when they're exposed to them.
Very interesting. It would be difficult to take cockfighting and hold it up to the conversation that we've had here.
I think so too.
Yeah. and come up with, you know, any kind of a justification saying that, yeah, we should be kind to all animals, like Sabina Paris, except for chickens.
Yes, sir.
Well, it's a real pleasure having you call in, and maybe sometime you could tell us a little bit more about veterinary medicine. I got a feeling that one of the upsides of being a vet is that your patients don't complain very often.
They complain with their teeth. Yes, sir. Thanks very much. Thanks very much for giving this subject this much time. I think it's important, and I'm grateful for it.
Okay, thanks for calling, Tom. Dr. Tom Poole, and I mean it, he really got me thinking, you know, after that phone call. Anyhow, we'll come back and spend a little more time with the chickens before the end of the show here. And I got a phone call here. Let's see, I've got Jack. Okay, Jack, I'll get you right after the call to the post.
A diamond ring turns into a black pearl and hangs shimmering in the sky.
Join 93.3 The Point for a spectacular celestial event. On the evening of December 26th, a rare solar eclipse will take place just before sunset.
We see the sun's atmosphere, normally not visible.
Most of the sun will be blocked during the eclipse, leaving only a ring of fire visible, and we have the best seats and the safest way to watch it.
It's one of the great wonders of the solar system.
Join us at the Point Coffee Lounge at the Sheraton Laguna Guam Resort from 4 to 6 p.m. on December 26th. The first 100 guests will receive a pair of Eclipse viewing glasses, a complimentary glass of iced tea, and a coupon good for discounts at Sheraton's Surfers Point Bar or La Cascada Buffet Restaurant. Join us for the Point's 2019 Eclipse Viewing Party, December 26th from 4 to 6 p.m. at the beautiful Sheraton Laguna Guam Resort. Brought to you in part by Sheraton Laguna Guam Resort, Mezcla Chamorro Fusion Bistro, and your Sky Watching friends at 93.3 The Point.
Okay, so here we are. That was the call to the post, Churchill Downs, Louisville, Kentucky. It means we're heading down the home stretch here on Call Tales. I've got about 8 more minutes before we reach the magic hour when the Real Joe Cruz starts to dance in the control room to the plaintive strains of Ravel's Bolero. And before I take this call, I will say this. In my entire life, I have never been cruel to a jackrabbit. So how do you like that, Jack?
But I've eaten a few cottontails, so. But anyways, yeah, I think here's the thing with Peter Singer is that many animal rights activists they take part of his philosophy. But if you suspend your belief for a moment and you try to understand Peter Singer, his philosophy really makes a lot of sense in this way, in that from one end of the spectrum, from animal rights, all the way to the other end of the spectrum, went to commit infanticide. I mean, it's his belief that, it's okay to kill a baby that's 28 days old because the baby isn't self-aware. And really, it's up to the parents and the doctors. If the baby is sick or something, that it should be up to the parents and the doctors to end that baby's life. No one, a lot of people will be aghast and say, "Well, what are you talking about?" But that if you follow his philosophy, it makes sense in a strict form from one end of the spectrum to the other. The problem is nobody takes this guy to the other end of the spectrum, so it falls. It's like a half-baked theory, but I think what the Dr. Poole is saying is that yes, we are stewards of life, be it inferior life, human life. We are stewards because we have that capability. We have that sort of godlike capability to make changes. So in that case, we sort of we are higher species, so to speak. And so in that way, when I was raised up, I wasn't raised up on Bambi, or I wasn't raised up on Charlotte's Web. I wasn't raised up on Aesop's fable. I was a young kid living on my aunt's ranch up north in Jigo, and she would take a 12 gauge, and whenever we encountered a family of feral pigs or feral deers, she would put the 12 gauge to them. The reason being is because they were destroying the floral that she was using as a surahana. And it became harder and harder to find it, and then we have to combat typhoons and erosion and stuff like that. So my first engagement wasn't, touchy-feely for these sorts of animals. They were pests, and they were made to be eaten. Chickens, we would wring the neck. the first time I ever saw a chicken butchered with a hatchet was when I went to the States, and I saw them how they butchered their chicken, and I said, "What are you doing? That's so cruel. That's so inhumane. Just grab it, hold it, and wring its neck." And so I think it's the environment that we're brought up, whether we're rugged and stuff like that. We have a problem with what they call anthropomorphic attitudes towards animals, because you see it in shows, you see it in entertainment, and so I guess it's one of those things that needs education, but in the same sense, it's kind of hard to argue when the media consistently comes out with these films, portraying animals as equals or something like that. My first experience of an animal being equal was the cartoon Animal Farm. So as you can see, my introduction to whether animals are equal, or whether animals are there for sustenance, or whether animals are lesser beings and require our stewardship, our conservatism. I was raised different, and I'm not the only one. I find that many people that I meet in rural communities, they're the same way. It's not like they're cruel to animals. It's just that, we do have a pet pig, and we have one that we eat. We have, roosters and ducks and horses. And, I just think that some of these things are getting overblown and misguided. And, a lot of the philosophy that comes out of the animal rights movement, I sort of I understand, but at the same time, I will never agree with it. But I guess that's the trend. Number two, I wanted to ring in on this Jonathan Turley thing. I think out of all the testimony, he made perfect sense. What those four people that were caught up, experts that were caught up, they were engaging in necromancy. And that's what they're supposed to do. What did people 200 years ago, what were their thought process? They tried to communicate, they tried to prop what they think the idea of those people were. And, in a light sense, it is a sort of necromancy, but it's, it's an educational thing. And it wavers. I mean, even Turley says, I'm the only one here in the stand that represents James Madison. He said that like an offshoot, but he said it with, dedication. He studied, he knows, and he believes that he was the only expert that spoke. If anyone would speak about Madison, it would be him. But he didn't negate the other three professors. He says we just have difference of opinions. And so I think really it's a partisan thing. I mean, you don't have support on both sides. It's a partisan thing. And I really think that this is just so to prevent Trump from winning in 2020. But that's my idea about it.
Turley went to some lengths to kind of make himself appear to be not expressing a partisan viewpoint.
Exactly, yes. And you are right. He was out here a while back.
Mm-hmm.
And, what can we say? This is the age that we live in. We see also in YouTube and certain media that they're trying to silence the conservative view of things. And, you'll see it in Congress, how they didn't even give a minority day in which the minority could present their case. So it's not just a process issue. It's about fairness. And so here we are. And I think that, there are a lot of people are going to be swaying to the right.
Back to animal rights, Jack. I'm really glad you called because your insights were profound. You added a lot to the program today. Thank you very much.
No, thank you, Bob. You're a treasure to our community.
Thank you. So long, Jack.
The Point is KUSG, Hagåtña, Guam.